And now to discuss more about the effects of El Nino and global food security, here with us we have Mark Smulders, a food and agricultural organization representative to Indonesia. Hello, Mark.
Good evening.
In a conference last year, FAO warned that the El Nino phenomenon would hit many nations and would last throughout the year. Now, how bad is it for Indonesia and countries nearby?
Yeah. Well, as you've seen from the broadcast, it's affecting countries worldwide, mainly the Horn of Africa, Southern Africa, Central America, and as you've also showed, it's both drought and flooding. Here in Indonesia, we know, of course, it had severe impact on worsening the haze and the forest fires last year. But the El Nino just peaked in terms of its strength in December last year, but it's still quite strong, and we're still expecting a lingering impact, particularly also in Indonesia.
Okay, talk more about the damage for Indonesia itself. Let's talk about figures and what's it looking like for Indonesia right now.
Yeah, well, you just mentioned the 3 million people affected, of which 1.2 million are dependent on rain-fed agriculture. This is the result of a survey that we conducted together with the World Food Programme and other partners here in Indonesia, mainly because we want to better understand how people's livelihoods are impacted by the drought conditions. It's one thing to wait, let's say, until there's an emergency situation and bring in emergency food aid and water and so on. But our main concern is vulnerable households that we want to prevent from falling into an emergency situation. So those are the 3 million that we really think should be targeted. They're actually throughout Indonesia, 38 districts, most of them in the eastern parts of the country, and under rain-fed conditions. But basically, our message is, invest now so that we can prevent emergency situations from happening.
So invest now.
Yeah.
And the Indonesian Disaster Mitigation Agency also predicted that El Nino and La Nina will occur more in the near future, and that's something that happens every 3 to 7 years. But how should the government anticipate the food security threats? How would they do that?
Yeah. Well, as you said, on the one hand, we have quite a strong El Nino, one of the strongest in history. Traditionally, a strong El Nino will be followed by a strong La Nina, which will bring quite heavy rainfall and hence risk of more flooding, landslides, etc. For the moment, the probability of a La Nina event is about 60%, but we're monitoring it quite closely together with BMKG, who are the experts here in Indonesia. But our main concern is really threefold, in that for the moment, at the moment, vulnerable households in these drought-prone areas, many of which depend on rain-fed agriculture, are having seen their income squeezed, food prices are rising, their production is going down. We've seen increased, we know that much of the planting has been delayed, both in rain-fed as well as irrigated areas because of the late onset of the rainy season, delayed by as much as 6 to 8 weeks, in some parts of the country. And not only late onset, but also a very variable rainfall in many parts still. Okay. So there's a risk that the harvest will be delayed and will be not as good as in the past. Nationally, will be okay, but it's those particular households that are in vulnerable conditions, that are often poor, that we're concerned with.
Mark, tell us what is FAO's conservation agriculture? Talk about that.
Well, that's one of the measures we're taking. Really, it's a long-term investment. I mean, we just spoke about the immediate needs, but there's many things we can do to what we call build resilience in food and agriculture. And one way of doing that is through conservation agriculture. Why? Simply because in those drought-prone areas, you need to conserve the land, the water, so that when drought periods do occur, the impact is not as severe. And in fact, we've shown in NTT and NTB provinces that that some of the crop currently under conservation agriculture is doing much better than the traditional, let's say, maize planted under regular.
You were talking about how to conserve water and the land, and that is traditional agriculture. That's also crucial for this conservation agriculture. Will these traditional techniques survive, or is that actually bad?
Well, traditional techniques, actually in the past, I think past generations, people did actually, conservation agriculture was part of the normal way of life. It's in fact with the more intensification of maize production, with higher yielding varieties and high fertilizer use, pesticide use, that in fact a lot of the soil has deteriorated. So what we're trying to do is try and bring back the health of the soil through organic fertilizer, and basically making sure that the water retention capacity of the soil is better than in the past. Yeah.
Now let's talk a bit about La Nina again, as you mentioned previously. How should the government prepare for this in terms of food security in the future?
Well, I think what's really important, and which we've also struggled with during the current El Nino period, is we need information. We need really good information from the district, from the household, from the villages. So for that we need good monitoring systems. We need basically to be able to preempt, emergency situation. So for that, I think there's a lot of data and information being collected by different ministries, by NGOs, by civil societies. What we want to do is have a system that brings together this information so we're better informed, so we can take more preemptive action rather than responding to emergency situations.
So better preemptive action rather than responding when it happens.
Exactly.
What about aid from other countries? What is it looking like for Indonesia?
Well, I think Indonesia has a very strong capacity to respond. I think Indonesia has a healthy budget situation, and it can respond well on its own, unless there's a disaster situation such as the tsunami event and so on. With the drought, I think the main objective here is to be well prepared, so that we can kind of anticipate. This is what we call a slow onset disaster. So the point here is to have good information, to have investment funding that you can invest so that we can preempt a negative impact.
Mark, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll have more after the break.